Sign up with AccuRadio for free and bring your ratings, favorites, listening history, and customizations with you to your mobile device. Look for the link in the upper right of AccuRadio.com to get started.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our KPMG Tax Chat. Today, we'll be talking about the federal government 2023 budget, titled Budget of Fiscal Sustainability and Transition. And to take us through this session will be Wale Ajayi, the head of tax, KPMG Nigeria. And then just before we start the program, is it showing now? We'd like you to just have a look at just shortly, we're going to drop the link in the chat box, and then also to, okay, just generally, on the 7th of October 2022, His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari announced, or rather, gave a speech on the budget proposal for the 2023 Nigerian budget, themed Budget of Fiscal Sustainability and Transition. And there he gave a lot of highlights on what has happened in the 2022 budget so far, and then provided an insight into some of the key assumptions that have been made for the 2023 budget. And some of them we're going to be highlighting today, and Wale will be discussing about them. So if you look at your screen now, okay. If you look at your screen now, you'll see some of the highlights of this. And so before we go into that, I just want to give Wale an opportunity, or rather the opportunity to come in at this point, and then to talk us through some of the critical key assumptions made in the 2023 budget and how it's going to impact Nigerians generally in terms of key infrastructure development and other aspects of our economy. Wale Ajayi, please.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much, Heike. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here to share my insight and my perspective on the 2023 federal government budget. I mean, what's interesting about the budget is that when you look at the history of Nigeria's budget, this is the biggest that we've ever considered. I mean, we're talking about a budget of 21 trillion naira. Last year, it was just about 17 trillion, and we thought we had a very big budget. But the only issue about the budget, of course, is the revenue. The government has proposed a revenue income of about 11 to 10 trillion naira. And last year, we had a budgeted revenue of about 7 trillion. So when you look at the size of the deficit, it's grown from about 7 trillion last year, to about 11 to 10 trillion, this year. It might even be higher than that, depending on what happens to subsidy, which of course is the elephant in the room. The government has only budgeted about 3.4 trillion naira for deficit, for budget for the fuel subsidy, right? And we know that if government does not remove subsidy, that may go up, as high as 7 to 9 trillion. So that is a black hole that we need to be concerned about in Nigeria. And that is why, everybody is talking about the issue, which is the big debate we're going to focus on today, whether what we're facing in Nigeria is a debt crisis or a revenue crisis, because the government has decided that we're going to borrow, to finance the deficit, and of course, from the privatization process. So that is the big question we will attempt, to answer today as we take the full dive into the discussion. By way of the assumptions themselves, I mean, when you look at them, one thing that comes out clearly, like some people have said, is that are they realistic? Are they reasonable enough? Right? You look at the oil revenue production, the volume. The government last year said that we're going to be producing about 1.88 million barrels of crude per day. Then there was a revision to the budget. It was reduced, to about 1.6 million barrels per day. And in this budget, we're saying we're going to be producing 1.69 million barrels per day. And when you compare that number with our OPEC quota, it's still much lower than our OPEC quota. But what exactly is the reality on the ground? We're doing less than 1 million barrels. So when you look at production, so that means we're already challenged, by production volume. We might not be able to make that production volume. Okay, and then you look at the exchange rate. I mean, government is budgeting that the exchange rate, will be about 434 or thereabout, to the dollar. But we know that the exchange rate on the black market is about 700, right? And so the question then is, well, that will be a positive side to continue to depreciate, the naira. And of course, you look at the inflation rate. Inflation rate in the budget is about 17%, and currently it's 21%. And then the question, of course, is, can we sustain that level? Will they continue to go up, given the fact that the headwinds, that have led us to where we are, are still there? So those are the issues we're going to be looking at. But on the surface, what it looks like is that we're going to have a top sell, in generating enough revenue to finance the 2023 budget. But again, time will tell. They say Nigeria, we're very resilient, but we'll see what happens. Back to you, Ike.
I'll divide myself like this into 5 pieces, into 5 solar. So 3 work for KPMG, 1 will do personal stuff, then 1 will do my normal stuff.
Okay, I'm not sure of you, but we can hear you.
Okay, so I was saying that in a short moment, we'll take a poll. We'll take some poll questions. There should be about 5 questions in the poll. The questions are to help us to understand or to get a feel of what you think about the 2023 proposed budget. So on your screen, you will see a barcode. You can scan the barcode if you're using your phone. There's also a link that has been dropped in the chat box. You can click the link to go to the site slido.com, I think, for those of you who are using systems. And then there's a code you need to enter there. It's also displayed on your screen, hashtag 4220552. So we'll just do that and we'll see you in the poll.
If I can also add to what you have said, I mean, the link to the poll questions is the drop in the chat box, so you can actually pick it up. Otherwise, there are other 2 ways of accessing the poll. You can go to slido.com and then, put in the event code, right? Or you can just use your camera, to scan, the code, the barcode that is shown, and it will take you straight, to the poll. We would love to hear your insights on the questions being asked. The polls are quite anonymous, so we won't see who is responding. So we'd like as many people as possible, to participate in the poll. There are 124 of us in this poll, so we'd like to hear what your views are on the questions being asked. So can we launch the poll? Yes. So the first question is being launched now. So we'd like to hear your views.
So the first question on the poll, the FGN 2023 budget proposal has been christened Budget of Fiscal Consolidation and Transition. Based on your knowledge of the budget proposals, do you think the 2023 budget appropriately reflects this objective? So far, we've had only 4 people responding to the poll, 6. Okay, the number is increasing. Most of us think that no, it does not appropriately reflect the objective of the budget. In fact, a good number of us think that about 80% now. Some of us are in the maybe 15%, saying maybe not. 3% are saying categorically that yes, it actually reflects appropriately the objectives of the 2023 proposal budget. So we still have a couple of people to join. And please, just like Wale said, we'll enjoin all of us to participate in the poll and then answer. So far, we've had only about 40 people responding to the poll. Can we have more numbers before we move to the second question? Okay. So most people still think, 75% think that no, the budget doesn't appropriately reflect the objectives it's meant to achieve. Okay, answers are still coming in. Okay, I think we'll just give a few seconds and then see if more people will join before we move to the second question. Okay, 74% says no, that the objective of the budget doesn't appropriately reflect its objectives, while 19 people said maybe, and 7% of the people that responded are saying that no, that yes, actually, it does reflect it. So I think there are more people who don't believe that it reflects the objective of the budget. Can we get the second question, please? Okay, the second question says, do you think the key assumptions, oil price, oil production, inflation, exchange rate, and GDP growth in the budgets are realistic? Okay, the answers are coming in. It appears that most of us are not optimistic about some of the things about the proposed 2023 budget, because from the answers here, 74% are saying that no, the key assumptions are very unrealistic. Only 9% are saying, well, yes, 16 is saying maybe they're not sure. They are just there to look and see what becomes of the new year before they can make their decision. So almost equal number of people who didn't believe that the 2023 proposed budget reflects, the theme reflects the objectives. Also, 76% are saying the key assumptions are not realistic. Okay, that's very interesting. Well, we'll get to discuss in depth when when Wale take us through some of these key assumptions in the budget and some of the topical issues or stay awake issues that have arisen from it. Okay, let's get the third question, please. So the third question coming your way says, do you think the government is addressing the revenue shortfalls the right way? So we've talked about the key assumptions. Now we're talking about, just like we showed at the beginning, the deficit, almost 10 trillion, 10.something trillion. And then we're asking, do you think government is, addressing the revenue shortfalls the right way? Again, a lot of people are still saying no, they don't think so. I mean, that's one of the issues we're going to address, one of the key issues about the proposed budget that we're going to address. So more answers. We're still expecting more people to respond to this. Okay, we just have 28 people so far. And the other answers, we had more than 60%. So can we just, key in our answers? We just give a few seconds to get more answers. Okay, so 93% of the respondents says they don't think government is addressing the revenue shortfalls the right way. Only 7% are saying they are not sure. And it seems that almost everybody believes that, apart from the 7% that are not sure, that government, 85% now, still 6% are saying yes, they're addressing it, 8% are not sure, but a whopping 85% are saying that no, they don't think so. All right, that's an interesting perspective. Let's get the fourth question, please. Okay, the fourth question is actually another interesting thing. Do you think the continuous borrowing by the government will solve the issue of budget deficit? Okay, everybody is saying no, no, no. They don't think so. That's quite an interesting question, don't you think? Don't you agree? 97% are saying they don't think the continuous borrowing is going to address it. 3% are saying maybe. I think these 3% are okay. 2%, because majority of people are saying they don't think so, and just about 4% now saying maybe. Wow. some people agree, 2%. 2% agree that, yeah, government continuous borrowing will solve the issue of budget deficit. Anyway, so again, the issue of budget deficit, remember the theme of our chat is Nigeria facing a revenue or debt crisis? So these all ties into the conversation. And so for now, all the respondents will have 94% saying that they don't think borrowing will solve the issue of budget deficit. That's interesting. Let's get the final question before we go into the main business of the day. Do you think Nigeria is facing a revenue or debt crisis? Let's hear your thoughts on this. What do you think? Is Nigeria facing a revenue crisis or a debt crisis? Oh, it splits in between for now, 50-50. Okay, interesting. So far, a majority of people believe we're facing a revenue crisis. The other percentage are saying it's a debt crisis, and very small percentage, about 4% now, are saying they're not sure whether it's revenue or debt crisis. But I think the majority of the people here, majority of the respondents, believe that Nigeria is facing more of a revenue crisis than a debt crisis. Okay. Thank you very much for your participation. It's been quite insightful, actually, seeing all the response that are coming from people. So before I take it over to Wale, I think one of the key questions I would like to ask, based on the information that has come up from or response that has come up from the poll questions, the last question, which also coincidentally ties to the theme of our conversation. A lot of people here believe that Nigeria is facing a revenue crisis rather than a debt crisis. What do you think? What do you have to say about that? From your review of the key assumptions and issues discussed by the president in the proposed 2023 budget, what's your own take on that, revenue or debt crisis?
Okay, well, I have to agree with the majority of our respondents, that believe that Nigeria is facing a revenue crisis. I think the question we need to ask is, how does a country or how does an individual end up in a debt crisis in the first instance? You end up, right, because you're not generating enough revenue. And if you're not generating enough revenue and you cannot manage your needs or the things that you need to do, then you need to borrow. So in the case of Nigeria, we've been touting the dividend of democracy, right? And unfortunately, we don't have enough revenue, right, for us to be able to achieve our dream. And that is why the government has decided to borrow. And when you look at what has been happening, the past 2 or 3 years, we've been borrowing, to finance the deficit, the black hole that has been created. This year, we're looking at about between 10 to 11 trillion naira, that we need, to finance. So that is the issue. We're not generating enough revenue. We've always dependent on product revenue, but unfortunately, we don't have sufficient output, right, to be able to take advantage of the increase, in the price of crude in the international market, right? Where everybody is enjoying, everybody is money to the bank. Russia is money to the bank. Saudi Arabia is money to the bank. Unfortunately, we can't, because we're losing on the average between 100 to 150,000 barrels of crude oil per day. That's about 1.2 million barrels of crude, that are shutting, by all operators. So that is an issue. So I tend to agree with them that Nigeria is facing, a revenue crisis. So borrowing to finance this is not a problem in itself. I think the question is, what exactly are you using the debt, to finance? The problem in Nigeria is that when you look critically at the budget, right, you're spending about 6 trillion, to service debt. We're spending about 5 trillion, right, to pay for personnel salaries and wages. When you add those two together, that gives you 11 trillion, right? That is more than, the amount of revenue that we expect to generate. So I don't have a problem with debt, right, as long as we're using it the right way. But, at the end of the day, right, you still have to pay back the debt. And if you're not generating enough revenue, then the revenue crisis that we're talking about will turn out to be a debt crisis. Now, the good thing about it is that Nigeria has imposed a limit, of about, we said, well, we'll not go beyond 40% of our GDP as our debt ceiling. Current debt stock is about 43 trillion naira. But we know that does not include the borrowing from central bank through ways and means. And next year, people expect that might get up to about 72 trillion naira. Okay, and that will inch closer, to our self-imposed limit. But the good thing about it also is that when you look at the limit that IMF has prescribed, which is 55% of GDP, so we're still within that, but we still need to sustain the level of borrowing, right, that we have, and we must be able to use the borrowings to finance infrastructure. Otherwise, we will face a debt crisis. Back to you, Ike.
Thank you very much, Wale. I think the interesting thing you said is, for now, we're facing a revenue crisis, but if we don't manage it properly, we're heading towards a debt crisis. And that's very, it kind of struck me when I'm looking at some of the key assumptions that the presidency is proposing in the 2023 budget. We're looking at an oil price of $70 per barrel at the moment, where the oil price, again, like you said, most of the other oil producing countries are smiling to the bank because relatively the oil price has improved in the global market, and we are still benchmarking us at 70%, and also a production of 1.69 million barrels per day, whereas which is even below what our OPEC quota should have been. So based on all these key assumptions that have been made, the exchange rate of 435%, what are the things Nigeria should be doing right now? Because just like you said, if we don't have to, if you're not able to manage the revenue that we're generating, then we're definitely going to face the debt crisis. I think we're already, one leg into that because of, our debt portfolio at the moment, and which is not still going to reduce. I mean, 75% of the proposed budget is going to go to debt servicing, which is significant coming from where we were last year. So what are the things Nigeria should do? Do you think these key assumptions that have been made, especially with respect to revenue, that they are realistic, that they are objective, and they reflect what the current economic realities are?
Okay, if I can start on the oil price, the price has been budgeted at about $70 dollars, right? Last year, we have been changing the rates because of the volatility, right, in the international market, right? And it's you might think that when you compare with the current price in the international market, which is about $93, that is really very low. But the fact of the matter is that anything can change, right? The price can fall and it can reduce. And you know that the US government have decided that they will continue to reduce or release from their strategic petroleum reserve. But this year, this is meant to end this month of October, right? They've been releasing about 1 million barrels of crude, per day from the SPR. And Biden administration has said that that's going to go up to 15 million just because of the election coming up, next month, early next month, right? So the price can change. So I don't really have a problem, with the price, right? So we can always adjust that. If the price goes higher, then it is positive, it is in our interest. But the problem I have is actually with the output, right? OPEC quota is about 1.8 million barrels of crude per day. And it's interesting when you look at the fact that Nigeria used to be one of those countries that would routinely exceed the OPEC quota. We used to do close to 2 million barrels of oil per day. Now we're struggling to do, up to 1 million barrels per day. If you can't get the revenue, the production up to the OPEC quota or up to the 1.69, then we're going to have a problem, right? And that is a big issue. And, and so on that basis, production, at least based on current realities, doesn't look, too reasonable, right? But can we get there? Yes, we can. All we need to do is to try and treat the oil theft as organized crime, right? It's interesting reading what the government has done. Government has just signed a reported contract again with Tompolo, for about 48, billion naira, per annum. And within 2 months of signing that contract, Tompolo came up and said, oh, they've discovered 58 bridge points, right? We all know that it's always been there. For me, I'd rather prefer the government spend the money on, on security to equip the Nigerian Navy, to be able to do what is meant, to do. So from the issue of production, that might be a challenge. We might not be able to get up to the 1.6.9 million barrels of crude that we said we will do. The other thing that is there is inflation, like I've said. Inflation at 17% being budgeted. We know that it currently is about 21%. And if you speak to every man on the street, they will say to you that they don't see inflation coming down. It's going to go up, right? So that is an issue. Exchange rate, because we're not generating enough crude oil revenue, so we don't have enough reserves. Our reserves now are declining. We currently have about $38 billion in reserves, and that is why we're facing US dollar shortage. I mean, you want to travel, you can't get PTA. You want to pay school fees, you can't get PTA. Even manufacturers that need to pay for their for their inputs, they can't get foreign exchange. So that will continue to be a challenge. So I mean, I see that foreign exchange will be an issue, and so the rates at which they're using, I don't think is realistic given what we see, in the black market. GDP growth, at 3.75. Well, it's tough sell. If you look at the revisions that the World Bank also have done, World Bank does not expect that we'll grow more than 2%. Even the revision for China also has gone down. So a 3.75% in GDP growth may be a tall order. I probably will see that we might be able to do between 1.5 to 2.5. Again, you have to consider that we're going to be in election mood, by election next year. And so government always comes to a halt anytime there's an election. So some of those assumptions look very tall order, right? But we're resilient, and somehow, maybe in terms of performance, it might be better than we can choose, right? But we need to take a look, at some of those assumptions. But the biggest one that we need to face is how do we increase revenue? That really is a cross of the matter. And if we can't do anything with crude oil revenue because of the issues we are facing with oil theft, then we need to then start looking at revenue leakages. How do we remove and plug those revenue leakages? I mean, the big one, of course, is talk about the oil theft. And then the second one is the oil subsidy. If you're spending 255 billion, naira a month on subsidy, then that's a problem. That obviously is not sustainable. And of course, we need to take a look, at some of the stranded assets that we have that are just lying fallow. Not done anything about it. I think so. There are some things that government can do. The question, of course, is do we have the will to be able to implement what we know we should do? Back to you, Ike.
Thank you very much, Wale. One of the things you said that struck me, say we are resilient. And then you ended your last comment by saying that we know what we have to do, but then does the government have the political will to go ahead and do it? You've touched on very key and sensitive areas when you were talking, the issue of security, then the biggest elephant in the room, which is oil subsidy, and then some of our stranded assets. I mean, it's being a talk ongoing because right now, looking at the proposed budget, the deficit is one of the biggest I have seen, in Nigeria since we started the third regime, this democracy. This is the highest I've seen it, 10.77 trillion. Where are we going to finance it? And it's not as if things are going quite easy, because look at the debt portfolio, we're still going to spend about 73% of the amount to repay outstanding debt, which means we have to borrow in order to pay the money we had borrowed before. So how long are we going to do that? And one of the key things you said is we need to find ways to unlock revenues. And you've touched on some of the key things I want to talk about. The issue of security, and the issue of oil subsidy, and the issue of our stranded asset. I think I'm not going to dwell much on security because maybe it's not something any of us can really do anything about. But the issue of oil subsidy, I mean, there's been talk over the years regarding subsidy. In your opinion, what do you think, why do you think it is critical for us at this point to sit down and review our plans regarding subsidy and address it squarely and head on to avoid, these revenue leakage and also to trap in more revenue like you mentioned? So what are your thoughts around the issue of oil subsidy and how we can address that?
Okay, just before I respond to that, so let me just kind of speak about the initial comments that you raised about when I said Nigerians are resilient. But then I then pose the question, does the government, do we have the willpower? Now, there are two things, talking about the average Nigerian on the streets, average man on the streets, and then, of course, the government. The average man on the street is always very resilient, right? Put them in any environment, they will try, right? Irrespective of the circumstance, irrespective of the challenges that we face. I even believe that the growth that we've achieved, if you look at the second quarter of this year, we've recorded a growth of 3.54%, right? At times, you ask yourself, how are we able to do that despite the lack of infrastructure that we have in Nigeria? That shows you how resilient Nigerians are. Now, when it then comes to government, I mean, the issue of government is everybody wants to win power. I mean, if you just take a cue from what happened in the UK recently, Liz Truss, when she was contesting to be the chairperson of the Conservative Party, made promises that we know are not reasonable. How are you going to cut taxes and then decide to borrow? I mean, you are borrowing against component taxes. We know it wasn't sustainable. So we're not surprised that within 44 days, we can see the mystery unraveling and she had to leave, right? So for Nigerian government, government will say things to win, to win power. And that is why we've got to be very careful, about it. Now, let me go to the issue that you raised about subsidy. Just imagine, right, if you're spending 255 billion naira every month in subsidy, you can imagine how much what we could put that amount to, right? And then also remember that the NNPC, right, has not remitted any single, nothing, no single couple to the FAC account, since December. That was the last time they remitted. Okay, so all the money that FAC is sharing today is from tax revenue, is from custom, because NNPC has been, of course, deducting the under recovery that have been killed, which is the difference between the landed cost of petroleum product and how much they collected, right? And so they have to recover that, right? So that's an issue. And so we have a problem where there's a very big revenue leakage that we need to plug. And the question I ask myself is, why are we, taking the can down the line? Now, if you ask me realistically, I don't think this government is going to do anything because they're going to leave in May. I don't expect a new government, right, that will come in on the 29th of May to do something about subsidy, because that probably might be too early, right? But the fact of the matter is that we don't have any other alternative. We found ourselves in a similar situation. It is not sustainable, right? And to the extent that it's not sustainable, then we've got to find a way to reform the subsidy. Now, people may say to me that we've been waiting on Dangote refinery, right, which is going to come on stream next year. I mean, yes, that is the 650,000 barrels of crude per day that we process by the refinery. That will go a long way, to satisfy the consumption in Nigeria. But guess what? The price of crude is priced internationally. It's still going to remain the same, right? And so what you find out is that, yes, if you are refining the crude in the petroleum product in Nigeria, the cost will go down, but the differential will just be the trade, which is the cost, transporting the crude, the petroleum product from the refinery, to Nigeria. That is what is going to go down. Maybe Nigeria can also subsidize at least, the production. And if they do, then that means you then also subsidize the cost, the price to all the modular refineries that are also, currently operating in Nigeria, right? And so, but maybe that might make sense. At least it's a Nigerian company that you're subsidizing. That is production. We are subsidizing, right? But at the end of the day, we have to come up with a program that can address the issue. And when I look at what we've done in the past, and I ask myself, why has it not worked in Nigeria? Why has it worked in other countries? How come some other countries have been able to successfully reform their subsidy program? I think the answers to me are very clear. I think the very first one is that we do not do enough analysis and research, to even find out what exactly are the issues involved in subsidy, right? Who are the beneficiaries? What can we put in place, if we take it away, right? The number two, because we don't have enough research, the only thing the government will say is that, well, we need to remove subsidy. And if you remove subsidy, you're going to spend the money to rehabilitate our refineries that have not produced a single liter of crude for how many years, right? And because government doesn't seem to have the credibility, so Nigerians don't believe that if they remove subsidy, that money that is being saved will be spent to rehabilitate the refinery. People want to see analysis, in terms of what exactly, will be the impact of subsidy. When you're not producing supportive analysis and research, people cannot, trust you. You remember when we did a Shopee program and wanted to improve it? We launched the program within 3 months. Government announced it. They're not saying to people, right, we're going to give you some sort of a, quality, that can tie you like Indonesia did. When Indonesia was going to remove subsidy, they gave people $45 per quarter, for a full year, even before they started removing the subsidy, so people can see what they're going to do. And so it has to be a gradual process, but we've got to have a clearly, and well-defined program that will also provide palliatives to people. And you also have to engage, with people. And when you're engaging with people, it's not just about talking the talk. You need to be able to provide facts and numbers. Numbers don't lie, so they say. When you can demonstrate to people that look at how much we're spending, and this money can be spent on something else to provide infrastructure, to provide healthcare, to provide education, people will believe that. But we don't interact very well, and we don't have support. So for me, subsidy issue is a big problem. It's a big revenue leakage. We need to deal with it, and the time to deal with it is really now, right? When I say now, it doesn't mean immediately because of the timing of the elections, but it's something that needs to be done. Clearly, we've got to go out of subsidy completely.
Okay, thank you very much, Wale. You hear it, we have to go out of subsidy completely. I think a lot of people who have, most analysts have actually, share the same sentiments with you, Wale, regarding the issue of subsidy. And I remember, even though this is not about Nigerian fuel subsidy dilemma, but it becomes critically important because of the role it plays in the finances or revenues of Nigeria. We can't talk about the budget without talking about the amount we spend on subsidy annually. Just like you said, over $500 and something million, a million naira every month, just to subsidize the cost of oil that is coming into Nigeria. Not even the oil, the cost of refined petroleum products that are coming into Nigeria. That's a lot. I think okay, Chidi gone on the platform raised an interesting comment, which I would want you to address. In his opinion, he says we don't have a revenue challenge. Or rather, I would say we have a revenue challenge, not a crisis. And he believes that as soon as the pipelines are secured, that we'll see a huge jump in crude oil production. He cited examples of Focado back up as 400 barrels, 400K barrels per day. And he's saying that he's more concerned about the debt issue, that the debt is more of a crisis, given the ratio of revenue we need to service it. And we cannot quickly get out of it in terms of repayment. So this will be with us for a long time and continue to inhibit our growth and ability to develop. So if you look at the two comments that he has made, saying that he doesn't believe we'll have a revenue crisis, or what we have is a revenue challenge, and then that the debt is the issue because of the ratio of revenue that we need to service it. And there's a connection there. He doesn't believe it's an issue, but he's saying for us to service the debt, which he believes is the one that's a crisis, we still have to fall back to the revenue. So what's your take on that? Is it really that it's a challenge, or because of the debt that is causing it to be a challenge?
Okay, yes. The last time I checked, we're in democracy, so everybody is entitled to their opinion, and I think it's right in a way. But let me start. When I opened the comments on this particular topic, I said, right, how does one get into a debt crisis in the first instance? Or how do you get into a debt challenge, whatever word you want to use it? It's because you don't have enough, it's mainly because you don't have enough revenue. Because it's also possible that you can have revenue, you can just be careless and you start borrowing. But how do we in Nigeria find ourselves in the situation which we found ourselves? Is because we are not generating enough revenue. Revenue to GDP in Nigeria is just about 8%. And that is talking about total revenue. Right, and if you're then talking about tax to GDP, that's extremely very good, right? And when you look at how much we're generating, vis-a-vis tax, then there's a problem. And then you look at how much we're generating vis-a-vis the major, earner of foreign exchange for us, there is a problem. I mean, like I started, Nigeria, we used to do 2 million barrels, but at the time we were doing 2.5 million barrels of crude oil per day. Just imagine, all right, if we're doing 2 million barrels of oil per day, and you apply the $70 per barrel that government has even budgeted, even though we know the actual rate is about 93, can you imagine the differential in data that will come to the coffers of government? But because we are not generating enough revenue, government still need to provide services, right? And so we have to borrow, right? And so the reason is because we're not generating our revenue, then we have a debt challenge, right? It's not yet a debt crisis, but if we continue on the path that we're going, right? The oil theft, we've paid a lip service to the oil theft. The oil theft issue did not start today. It's always been there for years. They started stealing, 100 barrels, 200 barrels, 500 barrels. Now we're talking about 100,000 to 150,000 barrels per day. And it is then that we've woken up and saying, oh, there's a problem. We need to deal with this issue of oil theft, right? But you know, the question I always ask myself: do we even understand what the issue is? Do we understand the people that are involved? Now we've spoken about the Escravos issue. Well, it turned out to be not to the Focados, you know, the bridge that they allowed. When they said there was a undersea pipeline, it was actually Escravos, right? That was connected, you know, over 9 years ago. Now it's been what, 3 weeks, 4 weeks since that announcement was made. How many people have been arrested? So we pay lip service to that. So the way I look at it is that if we don't generate enough revenue, right, it's a problem. We have to borrow. That is a no-brainer, right? And that is why we're borrowing. But as you continue to borrow and you're not using the borrowing, the debt, you know, on infrastructure, and you're using the debt to pay salaries, right, and to pay debt service, right, then what then will happen is that it becomes a vicious cycle, right? Because then the revenue is not enough. You are borrowing more, and if you're borrowing more, you have to then continue to borrow more, right, to be able to provide services. And then you're spending the debts, you know, on salaries. Then you're going to then have to have a debt crisis. So it's just a matter of time that if we do not manage the situation, we'll find ourselves in a debt crisis. Yes, if you ask government, they will tell you that currently our debt to GDP is 23%, which is lower than what they have themselves have set, you know, as a limit within which it must not go beyond, which is, you know, 40%. And they're quick to tout that IMF is 5%. And yes, we're doing 23%. But as you continue to borrow, right, there's going to be a problem, right? And then it's going to go up. And before we know it, right, the debt to GDP ratio will go up, you know, higher than 44%. If you remember, and in fact, let me just use this analogy. Our deficit to GDP, we had always pegged it at 3%. Now in 2023, the deficit to GDP is going to be about 4.75%. It's going to it might even be higher than that, right? But we have made change through the Finance Act that government can actually, you know, have a deficit that is above 3%. Now, if there's an existential threat, and of course, because of the security issues in Nigeria, the government has decided to go beyond the 3%, you know, that has been set aside. And the same thing with the 40% debt to stock ratio. If we continue to go the way we're going, right, we're not, governance is very expensive. It's just a matter of time that will exceed that debt, you know, to GDP ratio of 40% that government set as, you know, as imposed. So for me, it's a revenue challenge we're facing now. Well, it can turn out to be a debt crisis if we do not manage the situation.
Okay, thank you so much, Wale. I think you know, it's been quite an interesting conversation, and the general outlook from, you know, from conversations I've had with people so far is the concern is how are we going to resolve this revenue crisis? I know you've touched, you know, while you were making your explanation, you've touched on a couple of them. You know, the issue of oil theft, the issue of oil subsidy, the stranded asset, the insecurity. And I'm looking at all this and I'm asking myself, the issue of insecurity for me becomes more critical. And I think that's where, or rather, I think if we're able to solve that, we should be able to attract more investment. I'm also looking at how much investment have come into Nigeria, because again, we are not an island. We need the resources of, you know, external investors as well as local investors to be able to improve, you know, the economy of Nigeria. So, so it becomes quite critical. Now, you know, one of the cases we've talked about them. How do we address this issue of revenue shortages before we land ourselves into a debt crisis?
Okay, I think it's for me. Well, when I say it's clear, and then you then ask yourself, why, if it is that clear, why are we not, you know, implementing them, right? And that is where the issue of the will that I spoke about, you know, comes in. I think the first thing that we need to do is that we need to plug all leakages in our economy, right? So I won't spend too much time on that. I've spoken about the issue of oil theft. We need to address that, right? And number two, of course, we need to address the issue of fuel subsidy. right? So we need to address the revenue leakages that we have, because what we're saying is that we're not generating enough revenue, and the little revenue that we're generating, right, we're wasting the revenue. So we need to plug that hole. So that is one. The number two, the cost of governance has got to come down, right? I mean, it's good that, we must commend this government. Government has put in place a policy that says when you look at the government owned enterprise or owned company, right, their cost must not be more than 50% of the revenue, right? So, but we need to go beyond that, right? You can put a policy that limits the cost to 50% of revenue. But then the question is, how do you ensure that the account remains, that surplus, to the account, so the prevention account, okay, or to consolidated account? How do you ensure they remit it? Because when you look at the story, we all know it was a couple of years back when JAM came in and remitted so much money, and we didn't realize that they were making so much money, right? How many of those examples can we see that government will remit that? So we need to, ensure that, number one, reduce the cost of governance. We can't be spending, close to 5 trillion of your 11 trillion on personnel. So the size of government has got to come down. Now, whether we have the will to be able to do that is another thing entirely, but we know that is the right thing to do. The cost of governance, has to come down. The number three that I think we need to do, of course, we've been talking about diversifying, from oil revenue, to non-oil revenue, right? Oil revenue in the 2023 budget is going to contribute 20%, while non-oil revenue will contribute about 80%, right? Because oil revenue is so unpredictable. The volatility in the oil market is high. When Russia invaded Ukraine, they turn everything upside down. And that is how volatile the oil industry is. So you cannot budget on the basis of what you expect, from crude, right? But with taxes, they are pretty predictable. If you, for example, you define that you're going to get 3% of tax to GDP ratio, so you know your GDP, so you know how much of money that you can get, and it's more predictable than the oil revenue. So you can plan towards that. So we need to diversify away from crude. But again, since before I was born, we've been talking about diversification, and now we're still talking about diversification. Whether something will happen is another thing, entirely. But the important, of course, is that the increase of non-oil revenue is going on, and so we need to sustain that, right? And I think the other thing we need to do is to look at our incentive system, right? And this is one area. I did a write-up on this, and I asked myself, right, why do you grant incentives? You grant incentives because you want to be able to attract investment into your country. Now, but what have you found out? You see that a lot of countries are granting incentives. So what we've found ourselves is that there's a race to the bottom. So whoever provides the best incentives is where investors go to. But we also know that some of the reasons why investors invest is not because of tax. They invest because of so many reasons. Obviously, security is one of them. Political stability is one of them. Infrastructure is one of them. The natural resources is one of them. So it's not just because of tax incentives that investors, will invest right in the country. So we need to look at the incentives that we're given. Let's start with our pioneer status, right? We started in 1971, right? What was the objective? We said to ourselves, if you look at an industry, right, that is not being developed or, in a way that should reflect the economic growth of Nigeria, we'll give them pioneer incentives. Since 1971, right? And yes, we're still giving pioneer incentive. There is no sunset provision in the pioneer law, in the Nigerian Industrial Development Act. So some of those companies that are supposed to be infant companies since 1971, anybody born in 1971, today is about what? 51 years old. We're still saying they're infant, right? But they become mature. So we need to take a look at the pioneer list and ask ourselves, those sectors that are there, right? Do we need to give to them? Some of them that are mature, let's take them out of the pioneer status. That's one. The number two, because I've talked about the fact that it's not because of incentives that companies would, invest in the country. Why can't we look at how effective the incentives that we have in the tax law? How effective has it been, right? Are we given, incentives to companies that ordinarily would have invested even without the incentives? So we need to do a review, of that, and then eliminate those incentives, and then look at the nature of the incentives that we give, right? Most of the incentives we give in Nigeria what you call profit-based incentives. So what did they do? They reduced the tax rate. So we gave tax holiday, we gave income exemption, right? We can shift, to what you call a cost base, right? Where what you are trying to do is to reduce the cost of the investment, right? By providing maybe accelerated depreciation, right, or special deductions. So that's what we need to do. Take a look at the nature of the incentives, and then adjust them to be cost reflective. And then the fourth thing with respect to the incentives or tax waivers that we give to companies is also ask ourselves, what is the cost, right? Anytime we bring incentives into Nigeria, we introduce incentives, we have never sat down, to estimate how much it's going to cost, right? The government has just enacted the Startup Bill Act into the right? So we have a Startup Act now, right? And we're giving various incentives, to startup companies. Have we sat down to understand how much impact it's going to have on revenue? We don't have the numbers. And there's no way in the world, when you're introducing incentive, the first thing they must do is to understand how much it's going to cost. If you remember again, if I go back to the mistrust issue, when they decided to remove the top bracket tax rates, for people that earn £150,000 in UK, right, to reduce it from 45 to 40. And then when they reduce the basic rate for the lower people, right, the question people ask is, how much is it going to cost the treasury? So the same way, how much is it going to cost government when we introduce this incentive? You must have a number to go by, right? And you can then be able to understand whether it is something that you want to do or you want to scale down. So we need to reform our incentives. And then, of course, the last thing I would say that we need to do to manage the revenue challenge that we face has to do with our stranded assets. There are so many assets that are stranded in Nigeria today. These are assets that can generate income, for government. But what have we done? We've left them unattended to. Take the case of the National Stadium south there, rotting. Take the case of the Federal Secretariat, nothing has happened, to it. Take the case of the Nigerian Integrated Power Project, right? I mean, they're just there, We've said we're going to privatize them. Nothing has happened. So we need to go, and I'm sure that when you go throughout this country, you'll probably be able to see some assets that are there and that can generate revenue. So we need to be able to identify them. Ask ourselves, do we want to concession them? Do we want to sell them? So there are things that we can do to be able to manage the revenue issue that we face, in Nigeria today. Whether you call it a challenge or crisis, well, I guess it's a matter of semantics.
Okay, thank you so much, Wale. Just on a lighter note, to answer your question about what we do with our national stadium, we used to rent them out for crusades and other social activities. I mean, you've mentioned very salient points. Well, you've mentioned very salient points here, on how we can address the revenue crisis. The incentive system. I know we've talked about the incentive system, for a very long time now, how it impacts, how government fails to do a cost impact analysis when we want to issue incentives, for them to understand, okay, if I give out this incentive, how is it going to impact my revenue? Because again, when you're giving, just like you mentioned, most of our incentives are profit-based, which means it reduces the income that is coming to government, because if the incentive is based on the profit I make and I pay taxes based on the profit I make, and you give me an incentive on my profit, it means that the tax I'm going to pay to you will either not be there or will be significantly reduced. Therefore, it's going to impact the government revenue. But so far, they don't think about it. We don't look at it. So what it means is we give the incentives hoping to attract investment, and at the same time, we are bleeding ourselves, somewhere. And I think another issue you mentioned, another item you mentioned, which resonated with me, was the issue of the cost of governance. I mean, it's like it got to come down. Spending almost 25-30% of our revenue or budget on staff salaries, it has to come down. The government size needs to come down, or we need to begin to review what are some of the critical, departments that we need to reduce, or non-critical departments we need to reduce or take away or merge with other government agencies in order to, optimize the cost of governance. And I think one of the things, again, that came to me when I was looking at the budget is the cost of collection. I'm looking at the cost of collection. It's hovering around 40-41%. So what it means is that for every 100 naira government is collecting, the relevant department is paying about 41 naira in order to collect that 100 naira. Do you think if we also address the cost of collection, it is going to impact, the revenue that is coming to government?
Okay, I mean, yes. I mean, cost of collection is it's an issue. I mean, it's not a big issue as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that really has to tie, with independent revenue and taxes, really and truly. And when you look at what government has done with taxes or with revenues collected by revenue generating agencies, whether you're talking about the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Authority, you're talking about customs, you're talking about the FRS, you just pay that 4%. So that in itself, I mean, it's probably realistic. Yes, but if it can go down, yes, it can go down. But I think that what we need to do to be able to reduce the cost of collection is basically technology. It's as simple as that. We need to deploy technology. Technology makes life easier for people. It reduces how much it takes, to file returns. Just imagine, what it used to be when we used to file corporate income tax returns. Somebody has to prepare your tax returns, and then somebody has to take them to the tax authorities, and the tax authorities have to review. If there are issues, they're going to write back to you. But now they file online, right? So it has reduced the time, that was spent. And at the same time, if you want to make payment, right, you have to go to the bank, go and cut a draft, and after you cut the draft, take the draft to the regulatory agencies or customs or wherever. But now you're making payment, right? So it's simplified the process. The same thing with the filing of returns. Everything, has gone in, right? So it's in technology. So we need to continuously deploy technology. And, and when you deploy technology, apart from reducing the cost of collection, what it also does is that it helps to improve or enhance voluntary compliance, right? Why would I rather spend all the time, going up and down to file returns and make payments when I can do it with one click on my laptop? So compliance will go up. And research has shown in many places where they have deployed technology, that it has helped to improve compliance, voluntary compliance, and which is what we need, to do in Nigeria. And the other thing about technology is that, because we're talking about regular challenge, is that when you have technology, it helps you to be able to manage data, right? Because you can access, all sorts of data of taxpayers, right? All you need to do from the comfort of your office, you deploy your data and your technology, to access general ledger or the corporate accounting system of a taxpayer. And when you can access the corporate account ledger of the taxpayer, you can manipulate and check, whether they're doing the right thing. So it helps you detect fraud, it helps you to detect instances of non-compliances, and it saves that. So we just need to deploy technology. So no wonder when you look at what the government has done, that has given the FRS, and I'm sure the states have the policy, that they can actually deploy proprietary technology, third-party technology to be able to access the corporate account, taxpayer. So simply to bring down the cost of collection, let's deploy technology. When you're talking about the technology, we just have to make sure that it is the right technology. And of course, we need to address the concerns of taxpayers. I mean, there's so many concerns, and one of them is basically privacy and confidentiality. How do I ensure that by accessing my data, you're not going to areas you're not supposed to access, to protect intellectual property, right? And how do you protect the information that you have? I mean, those are concerns that we need to put in place. But the simple answer to reducing cost of governance is deployment of technology.
Okay, thank you so much, Wale. Deployment of technology will help us to reduce the cost of governance. Just before we continue, we'd like to take a second pool of questions right now. Now, the second pool of questions will also address some of the issues that Wale has been discussing since, in terms of how to address revenue challenge and some of the other items in the budget. Again, the whole idea is for us to get your sense of what you think about the issues that are currently in discussion. And we also want to hear from you. So after the poll questions, we'd like to see more of your questions in the chat box. Feel free to drop your questions so we can read it out and then address it. But before we go to the poll question, well, there's a comment here that's quite interesting. I think I have to read it out. It says, Babajide Babatunde says, I would like to give an analogy of a leaking bucket with many holes under a tap and water flowing into it. What should be the first thing to resolve? And he said it's more important to focus on the leakages than the inflow. Else, even if the inflow is increased, it will still be stolen. Nigeria have a spending problem not necessarily a revenue problem. So this kind of brings a different perspective.
I agree with him 100%, and that is why one of the solutions I propose is in addressing the revenue issue, has to do with plugging those revenue leakages, right? Because there's no point. It's like you have a basket and you're just trying to pour water into a basket, right? It's just wasting your energies, wasting efforts, and what have you. So I agree with him, right? But hey, we can chew gum and work at the same time. Right, where we're trying to, we are not going to first say to ourselves, okay, we're not going to generate revenue. Let's first plug the leakage, right? At the same time, we're plugging the leakage. We are also trying to generate revenue. So that is what we need to do, and that is what successful countries have done. And there is nothing that says Nigeria is an exception.
Thank you very much. Indeed, Nigeria is not an exception to success, and so we continue to strive. Just like Wale said. We are resilient, and we're also a resilient nation. So we move straight into the second part of the poll. So the link is there in the chat box. You can click on it, or you can scan the barcode that is displayed on your screen now to take you to, if you're using your mobile phone. If you're using your laptop, you can click the link that is in the chat box to take you to the site, and then you impute the number, the code that is displayed on your screen, 9611983, to join the session. So we'll just give a couple of seconds for people to join before we launch the questions. Again, you can scan the barcode, or you can use the link dropped in the chat box. And your responses remain anonymous, but it helps us to gauge the people's feel about the issues that is currently under conversation. So we have about 230 something people in the session now. We want more of you to join in the session, in the pool session, answer the questions, and let us know what you think about the proposed 2023 budget. Okay, so we'll go to the first question. The first question says, do you think there has been a positive economic effect of the borrowings by the government? Now, we've talked about the issues of government borrowing. How do we address it? Why do we borrow? What are some of the issues that cause us to borrow? And Wale has talked extensively on some of these, issues, why we borrow and what the cost is. So do you think, so far, all the borrowings we've done, whether it has a positive economic effect in terms of governance? So, well, a lot of people are saying no. Right now, about 79% out of 40 respondents are saying no. They don't think it has any positive economic effect. About 11% are saying, okay, 13% are saying yes, it does. Then the other 14% are saying they are not so sure. Anyway, okay, that's quite interesting. So far we have 75% saying that no, there's no positive economic effect or benefit, while 13% are saying, yes, there is, and 13% are saying, so it's like 50-50 between yes and not too sure. So far, it's just the majority that are saying no. So we'll go to the second question. Second question. So the second question, at 21 trillion naira, the proposed expenditure in 2023 budget is the biggest so far. Do you think the government expenditure figures are too high? Again, looking at some of the parameters where the spendings are going to go. So do you think this figure, 21 trillion of expenditure, is too high? Yeah, most people are saying yes, they believe it's too high. Some are saying no. About 30% are saying no, it's not too high. And 3% are saying, I'm not sure whether it's too high or too low. We'll just wait and see how the outlook will be. But Wale, in your opinion, what do I know I'm not putting you in the line of fire here, but what do you think? Do you think the expenditure, given all the parameters where the expenses are going, whether it's too high, or is it in line with the theme, which is consolidation and transition? Do you think it's a reflection of that?
I think it's when we ask the question whether it is too high. I mean, it's too high and just relative to what? Number one, too high relative to the income that is being generated, or too high relative to where it is being spent. Now, if you take the first part, if it is relative to the income that is being generated, right? I mean, we're going to generate about 10 trillion in 2023, based on what government has said. That leaves a deficit or a black hole of about 11 trillion. So to that extent, it's too high, right? But you can then say, well, government is going to borrow to finance that. There are two things that have happened, since the president announced the budget. Number one, right, you've always, dependent on borrowing. If you look at what happened in October, this October, what you call sales to offer ratio, government normally does this monthly, bond auction, right? And in October, government offered about 225 billion, and only about 100 billion was taken up, so translates to about 48%. So what that means is that the ability to even raise borrowing or borrow to finance the deficit is limited. We don't know what's going to happen to 2021. If that trend continues, then we might not even be able to borrow, right? Okay. So relative to income, well, it appears too high because of the black hole. Then when you then look at what we're spending each on, then that is where we have a bigger problem, right? We're spending 6 trillion on debt service. Obviously, you have to pay your debt. If you don't pay your debt, your sovereign rating will go down. The outlook will be negative for Nigeria. Our ability to raise funds, will be constrained because cost of interest will go up, right? And you're spending 5 trillion on personnel, right? I mean, that is an issue. That is a concern, right? We rather should be spending, the expenditure, on infrastructure. So if that is what we're spending on, right, it's going to pay itself back, right? So when I look at those two perspectives, relative to income and relative to where we're spending the money on, then it is too high. I tend to agree with the majority.
Okay, thank you so much, Wale. I think the overwhelming majority too agrees there, and thank you for providing that insight. So we'll go to the third question. Before we, while we're going to the third question, I'm thinking of what Wale has just said, revenue being too high in terms of revenue generated and area of expenditure. We'll get back to that when we're done with the poll. The third question says, do you think a budget surplus is a mirage and not possible in a country like Nigeria? Everybody, in fact, it seems like most people are saying yes. The responses we are getting so far saying no, that is not a mirage, and they think it's possible. The other people are saying yes, it's actually a mirage. We don't think it's ever going to be possible in Nigeria. I'm not sure that in the little time I've spent, understanding what budget is, that I've ever seen Nigeria ever with a budget surplus. It's always a deficit, And if I take from the trend, at least the time that I've been available to observe it, I would say it's not possible, because at least in my own time, I've never witnessed a budget surplus. So far we've had about 40.
Can I just
okay. Yeah, go ahead, Wale.
Speak on that. It's very interesting, this particular question. It's very interesting, whether budget surplus is a mirage in Nigeria. And the way I would like to approach it is to focus on the British idiom that says, right, you must cut your coat according to your cloth, right? Cut your coat according to your cloth, right? Now, well, what have we done in Nigeria, right? We have changed that idiom to read cut your coat according to your size, right? And so what does that mean? If I look at it in Nigeria, Nigeria is the biggest economy in Nigeria. So to the extent that we're the biggest economy in Nigeria, so everything that we do in Nigeria must reflect our size, right? So every every one out of every 6 Africans, right, is in Nigeria, right? Our economy is 235 billion in size. So that's 235 trillion in terms of GDP size. That is big, right? So what are we doing? So we're looking at our size and we're spending according to our size, rather than spending according to the size of our plot, which means according to the revenue that we generate. Just imagine an individual. Anytime an individual is spending money, more than what he's earning, it's just a matter of time, that to go bankrupt, right? And so that is the reasons why we continue. Unfortunately, for a country can't go bankrupt, because the country will continue to be built up. right? Country can fail, but but you still exist. You can't go bankrupt, right? So what we've been doing in Nigeria is that we always believe that irrespective of the deficit, we will cover it as long as we have access, to borrowing. Like I've said, our ability to even borrow is now being challenged by what happened, just in October, where the sales to offer ratio is just about 48%. Government could not raise enough revenue from the market based on what they wanted. So that would be my answer. So I would tend to agree with the majority again that achieving the budget surplus in Nigeria, at least in my generation, may be a mirage, not a possibility.
Interesting, Wale. And I'm sure that many people that are participating in this poll, I'm not sure anybody had witnessed the budget surplus in their time so far. So it's always been a deficit, and so it's probably what is going to beyond the economic analysis or parameters you provided, but based on sentiment, I would say that I've never seen it. So something that hasn't happened before, I would tend to agree that it may never happen. But well, let's just keep being optimistic. Just like your first comment, we are a resilient people, and I want to believe that that should count for something somewhere down the line. So the next question, I have a couple of questions or comments in the chat box or in the Q&A session, which I'll read out later, Wale, for your reaction. So the next question is increased taxation the right way to generate revenue? What's your take on it? Do you think government increasing taxes would be the right way to generate additional income? Given the conversations we've had so far, most people are saying 93%, 82% of the 20 respondents are saying no, that they don't think it is the right thing to do. Okay, the answers are increasing. Can we get more people to respond to this, please? Because I think this is very critical. This is one of the critical issues, because again, remember that when the government was announcing, was reading the budget, proposed budget to the joint session of National Assembly, one of the things he did mention in that speech is highlighting that the Finance Act 2022 is underway, and that the finance minister would work on it with her team and then finalize on it. We don't know what's going to come out of it, but we know that if we take what is happening so far in the past 3 finance acts that have been issued, we see there's always actions around taxation, one form of whether a marked tax or increase in tax rates and all that. So okay, well, it is actually very interesting. We have about 51% respondents, and 78% of them are saying no, they don't think increasing tax will be the right way to generate revenue. I know you've talked about some of the issues we should do to address our revenue challenges. Would you reckon with them to say that increasing taxation right now will not be the right way, given the circumstances and the economic situation in Nigeria?
Well, I wish I could say, well, government should not increase tax, right? But unfortunately, the fact is, again, we have a revenue challenge. Some taxes have to go up. I think the question, of course, is where do you increase taxes? What kind of taxes should you be introducing? And I think, if they're focusing on same taxes, all those taxes that would, help to at least reduce the amount of money we spend on healthcare, I think that will go a long way. Now, but the fact of the matter is that there is no country in the world that can tax its way to growth, right? Because nobody is going to go to places or to countries where the tax rate is very high. And that is why you're seeing some countries reducing their tax rates to be able to attract investment. I think the problem in Nigeria is not so much as the tax rates, because our tax rates, I think, are competitive. Of course, we can still come down, really, to be able to attract investment. But I think it's for us to be able to encourage voluntary compliance, which is very key. Because when you look at, most of the countries, where did they generate the bulk of the revenue? The bulk of the revenue comes in from personal income tax, right? But in Nigeria, we don't even know how much we generate from personal income tax. Is extremely very right, and because people don't pay taxes in Nigeria, and we don't have a way to manage or to monitor them. So if we can improve voluntary compliance, that would be key. Number 2, if we can also enhance tax administration framework, in terms of the ability to be able to understand what the tax gap is and how to bring the tax gap and deploy technology. That will go along, right? So, increasing taxes will not be the best way, but of course, we can focus on some areas of taxes like sin taxes, right? At least so that I can reduce what government spend, on healthcare. But again, I haven't said that. The other issue that would just like to quickly point out is that because we don't have any choice in Nigeria, right? And like I've said from the beginning, the tax revenue is more predictable. So let's just try and and enhance the environment surrounding collection. If we can do that, at least we'll be able to collect more, from taxes. Because when you look at what is happening, it's the same set that are being taxed. The same set of companies are paying taxes. Nothing is being done to widen the tax net. Now, I know that we also need to look at the KPIs, the key performance indicators that we give to tax authorities. I think it's not sufficient, in my view, to just look at how much was collected relative to budget. I don't think that is the key way that is a way to look at it. Yes, it is okay. I mean, I understand why you have to focus on how much you've collected relative to the budget. We also need to look at how many new taxpayers have you brought into the tax net. How much of your collection is coming in from those taxpayers? How much have you been able to reduce your tax gap? Right? Are we even sat down in Nigeria to identify what our tax gap is and relative to what we're collecting? And those are KPIs that we really need to be focusing on, and that will help us to improve collections, from revenue or from customs, as the case may
Okay,
be.
thank you so much, Wale, for those comments. I think I'll come back to that, but let's just finish the pool question, because I have a couple of questions here and I have some other comments, based on the issues you've raised while you're talking, that I would like you to, provide much more context to them. So we take the last question, which is, since 2019, the present administration has consistently issued the annual finance bill together with the appropriation bill. In your opinion, which areas should the 2022 finance bill focus on? This time around, we want you to include, have to type in, please list the focus areas. We want to see where, in your opinion, where do you think the 2022 finance bill should focus on? What critical areas of the economy do you think we should address using this piece of legislation? So we're waiting to see your comments. You can type into the comment section. Okay, agricultural sector, power sector, and education sector. Interesting. I'm also interested in them improving issues or things around power sector and educational sector as well, because I think they are two critical, sectors. Education sector and energy sector. So this is still saying the same thing. So power, I want to assume that the energy here is also regarding to power. Technology, taxation of high net worth individuals, privatization of assets. We have environmental and green energy, want us to improve infrastructure and education, divest Nigeria's assets. I think this is coming from some of the conversation we had so far today. Some of the things we need to do: education, roads, security, power, and education. I think a majority of people, are going towards power and education, and I can understand why people are talking about power and education. We talk about the issue of ASU and how power is a critical sector of economic development. It's been very bad, especially since the hike in the prices of diesel. I think people are beginning to feel the pinch when they have to generate their powers themselves. And IPPs are even more expensive these days and all that. So I can understand the clamor for there to be, focus on that. Aviation sector, interesting. Security, yes, we have an issue of security. Please, let's just keep it coming. These are actually very interesting things. Oh, importing companies than products. Okay, this is actually an interesting way to put it. It wants us to, and so this person says we should focus on things that helps us to import companies rather than their products. So more or less like bringing in investors into Nigeria to establish their companies here in Nigeria rather than importing their products into Nigeria. I think that's a good one. Power decentralization, increase in the tax net, power and manufacturing, clarity on the tax laws, areas of conflict with the FRS should be reduced. I think, in all fairness, over the past 3 years, government has actually, tried to resolve some of these conflict areas. The issue of the VAT on rent, clarifying what would qualify as a good or service, in addressing the issue of incorporals and all that. And I mean, there's been key issues or areas of conflict that the past finance acts have addressed. And I think, to give them credit, government has been doing that from time to time. Cancel frequent tax incentives. Interesting. Well, you talked about tax incentives, and I mean, someone is saying to cancel them completely. Say frequent, to cancel the frequent tax incentives, and to be able to address that. So these are some of the things they want to see in the new finance bill.
I think for me, it's not so much as cancelling the incentives. It's a matter of reviewing the incentives and asking ourselves, have they been efficient? Have they been effective? Right? When you sit down to do a review, you can then come to that conclusion. And the ones that are not effective, that are redundant, we can eliminate them. Right? But one thing we must always do is that anytime we introduce an incentive, right, we must always cost them. We must always ask ourselves how much, revenue is going to be forgone. Right? If we don't do that, then we're not yet started. Then we must have a ceiling to how much you must be spending on tax incentives. So, for example, if I look at the incentive they provided to startup, and I'm asking myself, 2023, the FRS, the revenue is going to go down. And I was joking with some people that if I were the FRS, what I would do is that I would determine the quantum of those incentives, the taxes or the revenue that are forgone, and I will add it to my budget as what I've collected, right? Because it's not because of it's outside of my control. It's government that have said these guys will not pay this, for 5 years or 4 years. So I will add it to my revenue as what I've collected. So my take is that we just need to review those incentives and ask ourselves whether they are delivering on the objective for which they are meant to achieve.
Interesting, Wale. I hope people from the FRS are not listening to what you just said now, because that would cause a lot of mischief. But that's actually interesting. I see some other comments here. Someone is talking about government to pay for their group life insurances. That's actually interesting. And then improving the police, taxation of informal sector. I think the informal sector is something I'm coming to, to talk about it, to ask some questions around it, because you've actually raised some comments when you were addressing the last question. You raised some issues around, new taxpayers, how much is from new taxpayers and all that. And I think that also has to do with, when you talk about increasing the tax net, also looking at the informal sector and some of these other, rather than killing the goose that lays the golden egg. Anyway, so that's quite interesting. We want to thank everyone who participated in this poll. Okay, transportation sector. I think, keep your answers coming. We'll look at them later and then, review some of them. But then back to the conversation, Wale. Before, there's a question here which ties to one of the things you were talking about before we went to the poll. So I have Chikodi Okoye who said that the projected inflation rate is at par with increase in expenditure. This was when you were talking about whether the revenue is the expenditure is high, and you said in what context, whether it's revenue generated or area of expenditure, rather the 21%, 21 trillion expenditure proposed, whether it's too high or too low. So her comment is that the projected inflation rate is at par with the increase in expenditure. And she said that the size of expenditure is not the issue, that to her, she believes that it is not too high for the size of Nigeria, that in her opinion, it is just grossly misallocated. So her concern is that the quantum is not high, but where the revenues are being spent, or rather the expenditure, the proposed areas of expenditure is what is the problem. So that the expenditure in itself is not too high based on the size of Nigeria, but where it's been allocated for them to spend it is where the issue is. Do you have any reaction to that?
Okay, what I would say, is that if you look at what we budgeted in last year was 17 trillion, right? And this year it's about 21 trillion, right? So that gives you about a 23 or 22% increase. The inflation is about 17%. So I can understand what she's saying, that we need to be able to be doing above budget. Now, if you take away inflation, the cost of increase is just about 3% or 4%, which is not material. So I do understand that, right? But then when you then look at revenue stays flat, right? Revenue last year was what are we going to do? Revenue we're saying to ourselves, revenue will be, close to about 11 trillion last year, right? And then this year we're saying revenue has gone down actually by, to 10 trillion, right? So nothing has changed, So if you're going to factor in inflation, you have to factor in inflation in both ways, right? So I understand that. But having said that, I think my take, my position still remains the same. It's a question of relativity. You have to relate it with something. Is it high? Like I've said, is it high, relative to what is being spent, which of course the person that asked the question or made a comment, spoke to, and of course, is it high, in terms of, your income? So it depends on which way you look at it. And then you might then be able to come to a conclusion, as to what it is high. But when you look at the size of Nigeria itself, 21 trillion naira is not a lot of money, right? When you look at the size of Nigeria, you look at this is still next to nothing. When you talk about South Africa, you talk about Egypt, they have bigger budgets than Nigeria. But again, to then say because Egypt has a bigger budget or South Africa has a bigger budget, that we should then try to copy them. Then it goes back to that corrupted idiom that I spoke about. The correct idiom in the UK usage is that you must cut your coat according to your cloth. But what we've done in Nigeria is that you must cut your cloth according to your size. And I think that is because we've corrupted that idiom, like we've corrupted everything, right? So we cannot understand, what we're doing. Yes, there's this scope for us to increase our expenditure, but at the same time, we also need to increase the revenue base.
Okay, thank you very much, Wale. Yes, we need to. I think that the adage you said, we should cut our coat according to our cloth, should be appropriate here, not according to our size, because our size may be more than the cloth that is available for us to use to make the coat. But in any case, another interesting comment here from Egra. He says that there has to be a willingness, and I think you talked about it already. See, there has to be a willingness and deliberate action by the government to deploy technology to collect revenue. He's reacting to the issue around collection. He said, but the use of technology will prevent the leakages, which I am sure works against the personal interest of the government people. Do you have any reaction to this?
Well, I think, I understand again, being in Nigeria, what the person is trying to say is that what we've done in Nigeria is that we've created opportunity, for rent seeking. Just to take an example, look at the railway system that the standard gauge that we produce. How can we have a railway system in this age of time where, at the same time, where government is trying to promote cashless, society? And if I have to go to Ibadan, I have to get there. I cannot book online. I cannot buy two-way ticket. I have to pay cash. It's contradictory to what government is trying to achieve. And so when you look at it, it's just to promote rent seeking, right? So I can understand, from that perspective, right? And so I know that there are people that may, frustrate, at the end of the day, the good intention, of government. But I think it starts with the tone or at the top, the leadership, right? It's a question of what do you want. And if you're able to lay down what you want, and I'm sure people can get that done, right? Technology really is the way to go. Look at what has happened even in e-commerce setup, environment. Before to buy stuff, right? So you have to go and look for supermarket or look for places where you have to go. Now in the comfort of your home, I can order anything, and it gets to me. Look at the burden, it has lifted off me, right? So it's easier for me to spend, right, than to be. I have to think twice if I have to go to a place that is far, right? But if I can get it online, we want to order food, I don't need to go anywhere, right? I stay in my comfort of my food, bring up my phone, and order what I want, right? So it makes life very easy for people. And so we don't have any choice really in Nigeria. We need to deploy technology, but we must make sure that we deploy the right technology, right, and that we have proper controls in place just to ensure that data is protected, because technology is all about data, right? Everybody's talking about big data. I just imagine every now and then you go online, right? You go on a search engine, and the next time you go there, it gives you some other stuff that you need to consider, right? And that is the beauty of it. Technology can encourage you to even spend more. So I think it's high time we introduce technology, and I must commend the FRS. At least they played a leading role in this. I mean, we have the filing e-payment system, and what we just need to do is to don't make the audit more seamless, by just reviewing what they have. They don't have to come to my office to come and disturb me what I'm doing. They have access to my corporate accounting records, and they can do the review that they want you to, as long as we have controls to protect data privacy. So I'm fine with that. So I agree with it.
Okay, thank you so much. This is on the issue of technology. And Wale, just to bring you back, when the poll question was going on, there was you made a comment regarding when we're talking about increasing taxation, and you talked about it is not just only that is not necessarily to increase taxation, but to improve the areas of taxation. And you talked about some parameters FRS or other tax or other revenue authorities should consider, which is how many new taxpayers, this is specifically to the FRS, how many new taxpayers have we brought into the tax net? How much of the revenue collected in the year is coming from these new taxpayers? And how much do we even have a tax gap? And how much have we managed to reduce that tax gap during the year? Do you think that having this kind of mindset, if we begin to pursue things from that perspective, is going to help us to address this recurrent concern of having to talk about increasing the tax net, improving the tax net, bringing in the informal sector into the tax net? Do you think that having guidelines like this to help the implementation will help, or rather having KPIs for tax authorities like this will help to address that challenge and make them be more proactive in terms of looking to how to expand the tax base rather than paying lip service to it?
I think what I would say is that what doesn't get measured doesn't get done, right? If you set the right KPIs, what are KPIs? KPIs are meant to be able to measure your effectiveness as an organization or as your effectiveness, right, as an individual, right? So what it does is that it focuses your attention on the things that you should be addressing, right? So if my KPI is just to make sure that I exceed my budget, but I'm not looking at how I exceed my budget is a problem. You remember one of the things I said is that there is no way you can tax your way to growth, right? When there's too much tax, it's going to come back, and affect the country. I mean, I was at an OPTS conference, recently, and one of the things that the OPTS officials, said to government is that, please, next year, I don't expect to see more taxes, in terms of, because the tax will come down, because output has come down. So they're already, drawing the attention of the FRS to the fact that the collection next year will actually be lower than what they did, this year, just because there is no output, right? So for me, is that we need to have the right KPIs, right? Because if you're just focusing on how much has been collected relative to budget, that is missing the point. We need to say, okay, this is how much we've collected. Now, how many in terms of new taxpayers have we brought in? So those taxpayers that we brought in, how much have they contributed to our collection, right? And that is very important, because at times you find out that same taxpayers that are always paying taxes, and it's just due to share, harassment, multiple taxes, and what have you. So you've got to find a way to be able to encourage them, get more people into the tax net, measure them, and look at how much they are contributing. And let me just touch on, I don't know whether you're still going to have this, but you talked about the issue of the informal sector. I mean, the problem with the informal sector is the cost of collection, right? I mean, when you look at how much it's going to cost you, right, to collect revenue or taxes from the informal sector, or if you go to my brother in Agbara or a trade fair, and you say you want to levy tax or whatever, it's going to cost you more. But you've got to find a creative way, to be able to do it. And so you've seen so many jurisdictions that have come up with the concept of presumptive tax, whereby they will say, fine, just pay this, whether a flat amount or a flat percentage. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is to get them to tax them, get them to prepare records so that in 3 years or 4 years time, then you can actually monitor how much they're generating. So for me, just about having the right KPIs. When you have the right KPIs in place, number one, just to ensure that we are focusing on the right things. Because focusing on the right thing is extremely important. It's not just about doing things right. It's just that are you doing the right things? That is very important. So we need to revisit the KPIs that we set. Because I know that the KPIs that we set is how much is just a question of how have you fared compared to the target that you've set for yourself. So if you've done 102%, 100%, say thank you. But we are not asking ourselves, where's the source of the money? Is it coming from existing taxpayers? If it's coming from existing taxpayers, it's going to dry up, right? Because by the time you do your audit, your audit for 3 years, and the next year there will be no audit, right? So what are you going to collect, right? So we need to focus on, we need to revisit the whole issue of the KPIs and adopt the right KPIs.
Very much, Wale. What you said there, what is not measured does not get done. And I think it's very important, especially your concluding comment, that when they collect the parameters they set for themselves, is it your budget is 100 trillion and I collect 98, then I'm saying, oh, I've collected 98, rather than saying, to drill down to say these taxes you collect, are they coming from existing taxpayers or are they coming from new taxpayers? And that way, it helps to more or less like address some of these concerns that we've had. Well, I want to take you back a bit, to one of the questions that somebody asked. And this question is relating to subsidy. Just in case you're joining us now, we're still talking 2023 budget. Is Nigeria facing a revenue or a debt crisis? And we have Wale Ajayi, who is the head of tax, talking to us about some of these issues in respect of the federal government of Nigeria 2023 budget for fiscal sustainability and transition. Now, Wale, Folusha was asking that, is there not a plan to close out subsidy by August 2023? That the extension of the payment was due to possible outcry and maybe election fallout. I believe the removal should be in phases. Government also need to be sincere as to who these subsidies are paid to. I know we talked about having to areas to improve revenue, and subsidy removal was one of the issues you addressed. And given Folusha's comment, what are your take on it? He said he believes it should be done in phases. And the second thing is that government need to be sincere as to who these subsidies are paid to. Do you think that doing these two things will help to improve people's perception on the discussions around the issue of subsidy dilemma in Nigeria?
Okay, the way I will look at it is that, so if you look at what the government has budgeted in the 2023 budget, right? So they put in the factor in 3.4 trillion, as subsidy, because they hope that by June, because of course, the suspension of the decentralization of of petroleum products, right? The regulation of petroleum products will last for 18 months. And when you factor in from January, when it started, by June, July next year, to be 18 months, right? So that is what government is looking at. But don't forget that this government will have been out by then. So it's not a problem. So it's going to be the problem of the new government. Now, whether the new government, and the first thing you want to do is to reduce subsidy, it's neither end of that. So we'll leave that to the next government to come. And this is where Nigerians have to be asking the right question in terms of the policies, in terms of the direction that all the three contenders, want to adopt. What exactly they don't want to do with the issue of subsidy? We need to ask them, right? At least one thing that was clear with Buhari was that Buhari was very clear right from day one that he wasn't going to increase subsidy. And if you remember, when it came in, right, after Jonathan had left, when it came in, the price of food was actually $54 per barrel. When Jonathan was there, it was about $90-something, to $70. But when it came in, it was $4. The second year, it was also about $53. So he had ample opportunity to actually remove subsidy then. We didn't do it, but of course the House has since voted. We're talking about $93 now. Can we remove it? But the fact of the matter is that we all know in Nigeria today that it is not sustainable. So it has to be a gradual process. But the question is the transparency. Do Nigerians believe that if they remove subsidy, the money is going to be spent, on infrastructure? The money is going to be spent on maintaining hospitals. The money is going to be spent to improve education. The money is going to be spent, in doing roads. That is the question. Nigerians don't believe that there's credibility in government. And unless there's that credibility, it's going to be difficult, to remove subsidy. Then number two, do we have the supporting documentation, the analysis? It's not enough to tell me that subsidy is costing 55 billion a month. That is not what I want to know, right? What I want to know is, or it's not enough for you to say to me that if I remove the subsidy, I'm going to use it to rehabilitate the refineries. No. What I want to know is what is the cost? What is the impact? How much is it costing us, right? These refineries that you've been talking about, they're not producing anything. We'll be spending money on them, right? You will continue to spend money on that. So there has to be analysis that shows, what exactly is the impact, right? So people can see, when you can present, information in graphs, right, in charts. When Ghana wanted to reform the incentives system, that is what they did. People could see, at the end of the day, when you could see the numbers yourself, it's not like somebody speaking, in an abstract sense. I can see the numbers, I can see the impact. It helps people to make decisions, and of course, it has to be a gradual process. Then you have to engage with people early on, right? It's not a matter of, at times it's a question of sincerity. I remember, IBB when it came in, and it was really not, he put it to everybody and said, do you want subsidy removed or not? And everybody was debating, but at the end of the day, he knew what he was going to do, right? There has to be sincerity, there has to be transparency, but definitely it has to be a gradual process. But there must be something that you must do that would, act as, palliative in terms of provide social care to the generality of Nigerians. So Indonesia, for example, one of the things they did was that they conducted what is called an impact analysis. How many people are going to suffer if we remove subsidy? What do we need to do, to be able to address their concern? The same thing with Ghana, right? But we don't do that in Nigeria, right? All we're saying is that, look, subsidy is not sustainable. If we remove it, we will use it to repair our refinery. Nobody believes that when there is no credibility. So there has to be transparency. There has to be proper documentation and analysis that will back it up. There has to be, periodic engagement. There has to be palliative, and the removal has to be a gradual process. That is the only way we can get rid of subsidy.
Thank you so much, Wale. And I think that addresses it. One of the things you said, it has to be timely. It has to be phased. We need to be open about it. We need to be objective, do our analysis, and carry the people along. I think one of the key issues is communication, and then to improve how much the population trusts the government, not just because they said it, but because we know that having said it, they are going to do it. So we need to keep the questions coming in. While we're still waiting for more comments, Wale, there's something else, people are, the last book question we talked about, taking us away from, I know this is not part of the core issues we're discussing, but it's still part of the things that the president mentioned, the Finance Act 2022. And people are talking about the areas they would want to see, being addressed in this, what's it called, in the Finance Act 2022 or Finance Bill 2022. And some areas have been recurring: power, education, and environment. And again, I think environment is also very critical. I think there's a tie between all of them: power, education, and environment, given Nigeria's issues, especially now with the flooding and all that, and us having to find a way to, having signed with into the ESG initiative, and to improve, how businesses interact with the environment. What's your take on this? To say, are these three areas critical really for us to use the Finance Act to finance bill to address them, which is power, education, and environment?
I think yes. I mean, that depends on what we want to do. But let me speak to the environment. So, because early next month, you're going to have COP27, okay, which focuses on the environment. Now, you remember at COP26, what the government did was that the president gave a commitment that we will have achieved net zero by 2060, right? So we need to start doing something, towards that, achieving that objective. And you also remember that we already have the Climate Change Act that has been enacted into law, and the government is seeking to introduce carbon tax or do emission trades, right? I mean, to be able to address the issue of the environment. And I mean, if people don't believe what is happening, all you need to do is to see what has been happening in Nigeria with respect to flood. And we know that even if you are someone that doesn't believe there is a climate change, we know that the climate is changing, right? And we need to do something about that. So I agree, and I think it's one area that the government is going to focus on, to try and address our Nigerian transition. I mean, not so much as in saying that Nigeria should go away from fossil fuel. Fossil fuel has come to stay. As far as I'm concerned, what is just going to happen is that the energy mix, it's going to change into more of renewables, compared to fossil fuel. So yes, environment needs to be addressed. Power obviously has been an issue. I mean, it's surprising that we've been over and around, in terms of generating, 4,000 megawatts, 5,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. I mean, that is not good enough for a country that has 200 million people, right? There is no way we can develop our industries if we don't have power. Power is the source of everything. We understand the multiplier effect. So again, it just boils down to the issue of subsidy. What does government want to do in terms of really having, given for people to, to be able to have the cost reflective. Of course, you can say to an extent that we already have the cost, reflective, tariff, but it just going to generate, more, to be able to, improve the industrial development, of Nigeria. Of course, agriculture is extremely important. Agriculture used to be one of the biggest earners of, foreign exchange for Nigeria. Before we discovered food, but hey, we've all gone to sleep. We've forgotten about our cocoa farms. We've forgotten about the groundnut and what have you. We've forgotten about the rubber, that used to be imported from them. Used to be exported from the Midwest then in those days. So, so agri is extremely very important. But the question then, of course, is what exactly are we going to do? Are we going to provide incentives, that will help people to go into that? But if we're going to do that, we just have to be sure that we're targeting it at the right audience and that we have an idea of what the cost, is going to be. So yes, I don't have any issue with the Finance Act addressing that. But one thing, of course, that I expect the Finance Act to address is the issue that I've spoken to, in terms of reforming our tax incentives. And I think that is one area I am extremely, passionate about, because I think that, waivers, they're one area of, where we're losing revenue. So we need to take a critical look at that and see how we can reform it. Of course, look at the issue of the whole gamut of tax administration framework itself. How do we make them efficient? How do we make them effective? And of course, look at the whole issue of government agencies. It's not enough to say they must make 50% of their cost must not be more than 50% of the revenue, but do they actually fully account and remit the amount, the surplus? So those are the things, because one of the things I found out in Nigeria is that, we like to top the talk, but when it comes to walking the talk, it's where we are found lacking. Remember in 2017, when we introduced the VAPES, right? And then a year after, we had the voluntary offshore regularization scheme, right? In 2017, a lot of people, took advantage of VAPES, right? And what then happened, right? Government didn't do anything to enforce VAPES. And so, believe you me, there is no amnesty program that government will introduce again that it will succeed. Once there is no enforcement, people are going to say, look at what happened in 2017, right? And so that is one thing we really need to address in terms of our tax administration and ensuring that we actually enforce, what's being. So these are areas I think the Finance Act, should also, focus on.
Okay, thank you so much, Wale. Talking about tax administration, and I think also we need to also look at some of our, like you said, the gamut of taxes and tax legislation we have. Some of them may not really be, be really, for the lack of what to use, maybe they are obsolete for us to look at ways to make sure that they are still relevant. So that's quite important. Okay, one other key areas. I know that reading through the president's speech when he was making the presentation, one of the things he highlighted as key achievements is finally enacting into law the PIA 2021. After almost close to 2 decades of drafting and debates and delays and all that. And then we've seen over the couple of years, we're still talking about how do we maximize, revenue generation? How do we improve revenue generation for the government to help finance this humongous, expenditure portfolio that we have seen so far? And we're looking at, yes, oil is one of still the biggest earners for Nigeria so far. And we've recently implemented or enacted right 2 years ago, the Petroleum Industry Act, 2020. And then we've been looking at 2021, I'll be looking at the implementation since then. So far, there were key rules that have been set out to say in the act for them to kick in to help to drive activities in the oil and gas sector. And we've seen, so far, what's your take on it? Is the non-implementation of some of these things or the drag in the implementation going to impact the operations of the oil and gas companies operating in the oil and gas industry? Is it going to create more confusion or help to ease, like the PIA has intended, their activities and help to maximize the potentials of that industry that as we expect the PIA to do? So what's your take on that?
Okay, thank you. That's a very great question. The way I look at it is this: the PIA may not be a perfect bill or a perfect law, right? But it's a good way to start. Like you rightly noted, we've waited for 20 years to get to where we are. And I know that one of the big objectives of the PIA is to be able to attract investment, and make Nigerian oil and gas industry more attractive, to investors, whether you're talking about local investors or you're talking about foreign investors, right? And people are saying, well, we enacted the PIA last year. We haven't seen that flow of investment in Nigeria. Investment is not going to come like that. It takes time, right? Obviously, Nigeria is facing an election. People are going to weigh in and decide, how the pendulum is going to swing before to investing. There are certain, conditions. Security issues have to be addressed. But, if you put that aside and look at the PIA itself, I think, it's a good hard law. And I look at, but at the end of the day, the law is as good as the way it is implemented. It's not so much as in having the law, but how is it implemented? When you look at, and of course, how independent are the regulators that are meant to ensure that people do the right thing. So the independence of the regulators is extremely important, and then of course the implementation process is extremely important. But when you look at the regulators, if you start with the upstream regulator, I think they've done, yes, even though, you will ask yourself that since the act was passed, was enacted, only one regulation, or two or thereabouts have been issued. Out of about 8, 7 has been in that form. My understanding is that they are the Ministry of Justice, right? So that might have delayed some of the decisions that operators will take, right? But in terms of at least, trying to, operationalize the law, they've done very well. So we expect that the PIA will actually will transform and will be, large, significant, that life changer for Nigeria industry. But again, we just need to be careful that we implement it the right way, and of course that the operators have the power, to be able to do what they are meant, to do. So I would say it's still early in the day, to say, whether it is achieved its objective. But from what we can see, from what the upstream regulator is doing, they're doing very well. The same thing with the downstream, midstream and downstream operator. There's so many other things. They started a bit late, all right, maybe understandably so, because they have to start creating their own website after the upstream regulator has taken over the website of the former DPR, right? But I think, it's too early in the day. They've issued out a raft of regulations, right, that operators are meant to comment on, right? And so you need those operations to operationalize the act. and they're doing that. And so I think, by and large, we're doing well with respect to the PIA. But again, the PIA itself, will not change anything unless it is properly implemented and the regulators are independent and all the support that is needed is given to them.
Okay, thank you so much, Wale. I think our time is fast spent, and so far it's been quite, an engaging session, quite revealing. Some of the things, some of the issues that have been discussed, are very, important. We've talked about a couple of things here, and maybe on a last note, before we round off, the debt crisis. How do you think we should manage this? I know we've talked about how to address our revenue crisis, and at the beginning you said if we don't address the revenue crisis, we're going to go into a debt crisis, or revenue challenge is going to get into a debt crisis. But I think that so far, looking at the debt financing, debt service, 6.31 trillion in 2023 proposed, and that's about 75% of the budget. How do we begin to address it? Because it's something that has given everybody concern, both personally. And then again, you talked about the issue that government can't even raise revenue again. They issued bonds and just about 48% of it was picked up. So which means it's a concern. This is not something we're envisaging. It is already with us and it's a concern. And if we don't address it now, the only way most of this debt had to go is up. And I'm not sure whether we will be able to get the kind of break we got during Okonjo-Iweala's time, when our debt portfolio was forgiven. So what's your take? How do you think we should be able to, what should we do or begin to do right now in order to ensure that it doesn't get too critical where we've sold our soul to debt?
The answer is very simple: generate more revenue. If you generate more revenue, we will not need to borrow, right? I talked about the issue of the bond, right? So even the borrowing. Right. The second thing I just remembered I should have spoken about, right, that is also affecting our ability to raise revenue, has to do with crude oil revenue itself, right? We're not producing that too many barrels of crude, but remember that one of our biggest customers, India, right, is buying cheaper crude from Russia, right? So they're not going to be buying Nigerian crude. Then you look at the other three biggest customers for Nigeria, and you talk about Spain, and I think Netherlands and France also are not buying Nigerian crude. So you're going to be seeing Nigerian cargoes not being taken up, right? So revenue will become an issue. So simple answer is generate more revenue, right? So be able to deal with that issue, and of course address the issue of the oil theft. Where does the oil go to? We have to understand the problem. Where does the oil go to? Who are the people that are buying the crude, right? So who are the people selling to them? We need to have, the way to deal with crime, like they said, try that tested is follow the money, right? All we need to do is to follow the money, right? And we'll be able to address the issue of oil theft if you see it as organized crime. And of course, gradual elimination of subsidy. So we need to generate enough revenue. That's a simple answer. Then we can then come to the debt itself, it's the utilization of the debt, right? So what do we use the debt for? Right. And I think this is where it becomes extremely, critical, right? That we use the debt, to invest in infrastructure. If we're using debt to invest in infrastructure, it will not. 3 years, 4, 5 years, it will generate enough returns to pay back itself. But the problem here in Nigeria is that we're using the debt to repay our debt and to pay salaries. And if you're borrowing money to pay OPEX, right? Obviously, it's a question of time that we get into bigger mess with debt. Yes, you can say that you can always borrow, right? But then when you look at the sovereign rating of Nigeria, yes, currently is neutral and the outlook is stable, right? But it may easily. The UK, the rating has become negative, even though it is stable. So we can easily move into a negative environment, right? And not even stable. Right, and then your ability to even raise bond or raise debt, is in that. Like I've said, says to offer ratio is 48% based on what happened in October, right? So we'll see what happens in November, whether the situation will improve. So the simple answer to your question is generate enough revenue. If we do, then we don't have need to borrow.
Okay, thank you so much. So here we heard it from Wale. The way to address our impending or debt crisis is to generate more revenue. And over the past 2 hours, we've been having conversations around how to address Nigeria's revenue crisis, or challenges as the case may be, and some other critical issues that have been raised based on the proposed 2023 budget of sustainability and transition. We'll come to the end of this session, and we want to thank all our participants who asked questions, who contributed in the poll sessions. It's been quite a revealing session for all of us here, looking at having to talk about some of the key issues that affect Nigeria as a nation, and some other things that we need to do to be able to improve our lot come 2023, because the whole idea of a budget is to help us to address how we live our lives or how we run the nation in 2023. And I think we've been able to look at some of the areas that may affect us and begin to help those individuals and businesses to start taking plans and putting things in shape to be able to weather whatever storm that's going to come in 2023. So wish to thank you, and I want to give Wale a last opportunity to thank our participants before we close the session. Wale.
Thank you so much, Heike. Just want to say a big thank you to everybody that has joined us, and also to remember that this is a monthly event by KPMG, and once you come your way again next month on another interesting topic, please stay tuned. And if by any chance you missed this the beginning of this events, it's always available on the KPMG Nigeria platform and also on YouTube. Okay, so thank you so much for joining. Please remember to share the video, and we look forward to having you back in our next KPMG social media chat next month. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you everyone, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Learn on the go and stay informed. Our goal is to keep the average user informed and up to date with relevant tax information. For the entrepreneur and investor, getting acquainted with tax laws and regulations could be quite daunting. Well, not anymore. Introducing the KPMG Tax mobile app, where you can access all tax-related news, laws, and insights in one place. Also, calculating personal income taxes has never been quicker. To get the app, simply search for KPMG Nigeria Tax on Google Play Store or iOS Store and install. Once installed, quickly do a one-time sign-up on the application to access a constantly updated library of news, laws, and articles alongside easy-to-use tools. The KPMG Tax mobile app has a minimalist design, making it effortless to use and navigate. What's more, if you can't find what you need, asking a professional is as fast as it gets. Let's walk you through the application. The full menu is accessible from the left and helps you jump to any part of the application in seconds. Access fresh tax news by clicking on the news icon. The seamless scroll makes it simple to view all news at a glance. You have news you've already seen and want to go back to, just search. Expand or share each news item to your friends with the dedicated buttons. Adjust your news preference easily from the settings icon and tailor your content. We have embedded tax legislation and popular cases in our tax laws section. Are you eager to know more about taxation in Nigeria? KPMG Tax app has more than enough for you. Stay on the cutting edge of industry updates with insights features. The new app brings together alerts, newsletters, articles and publications from industry-leading KPMG professionals. You don't have to worry about missing important regulatory dates and other notable events. The notable date feature brings them all into one place in a calendar or list, however you want to view them. For the average employee, entrepreneur or business person, KPMG Tax app has another important feature, the PIT calculator. Plug and play, simple as it gets. Input the required numbers and calculate your taxes. Also, the app has jokes and valuable tips. Check in to learn something new and fun. Still feel there's more to know? We've got your back. Ask an expert and get quick, insightful responses from KPMG professionals when in doubt. Learn more from various authorities through recommended links in the External Links tab. Read all about us to find out more about KPMG's service offerings, our responsible tax principles, and disclaimer. It's now a breeze to connect with us online. Just click on the link icon on the homepage to get to us on social media. KPMG Tax app, connecting with you on the go.